Hello, everyone. Welcome to Breaking Barriers to Pave Pathways for Asian Mental Well-Being. This webinar is presented by Step Up for Mental Health. And before we begin, I would like to go over some housekeeping guidelines. This webinar will be recorded, so I kindly ask for everyone to turn their cameras off and keep their mics muted at all times. On the bottom left, there's a microphone button that you can click and it will mute your mic. You're also welcome to turn your closed captioning on. At the end, you will have an opportunity to ask questions through the activities section. To ask a question, please click the Q&A feature, and I request that you do not use the chat function. So, hello, I would love to start off by saying I deeply appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to be here today. My name is Sabreeth, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a South Asian woman. I am a peer support facilitator at Step Up for Mental Health, and I'm the host of this webinar, Breaking Barriers to Pave Pathways for Asian Mental Well-Being. As this event is presented by Step Up for Mental Health, I would like to share our mission statement with you. Step Up for Mental Health's mission is to support, educate, and provide services to empower families living with the challenges of mental health disorders. We do this by providing a safe space to share stories and to find support for others who are dealing with mental health disorders or caring for a family member with a mental illness. We believe that mental health issues impact social issues, including education,
Sabrina, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your slide is not moving. I'm only seeing the first slide. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Can you see the?
I can see it now.
Okay, great. Okay, so we believe that mental health issues impact social issues, including education, homelessness, and poverty. Step Up for Mental Health strives to match families with resources to help them move forward with a more productive life. Are you able to see the introduction slide?
Yes, everything's good.
Okay, perfect. So as we transition into this webinar today, I would like to share a little bit about my purpose today. As being Asian, our culture, values, and beliefs shape the unique individuals we are, and we may find ourselves encountering these aspects of our identity to function as barriers against our mental well-being. Oftentimes, these barriers may prevent us from addressing, discussing, identifying, and ultimately accessing mental health resources. So Breaking Barriers to Pave Pathways for Asian Mental Well-Being is a webinar held for the sole purpose of mental health well-being in the Asian community to be holistically seen, heard, and recognized. This webinar provides a safe and welcoming space for all identities to explore what mental health can look like in the Asian community while providing resources to break down barriers unique to this community. I would also like to emphasize the presence and the value of your presence and attendance today. You have taken the opportunity to educate yourselves on the unique aspects that affect what mental health looks like amongst the Asian community. And this moves us one step forward towards being stronger advocates for our loved ones and our communities. As we move into our webinar, there are also a few things I would like to address. Firstly, this webinar will be addressing multiple barriers to Asian mental well-being. It does not encompass every barrier and aspect of mental health in this community. What will be covered today is merely a look into what barriers are unique to the Asian community, and at no point in time does this webinar replace nor speak for individual experiences. I would also like to mention that if at any point of time you begin to find that it's difficult to listen to certain topics being talked about, I encourage you to give yourself the necessary space and step away from this webinar if you would like. Lastly, with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the Asian community has been facing amplified challenges. With this transference of blame for the spread of COVID-19 virus on Asians, specifically Chinese individuals, racial harassment and violence have heightened globally. As we witness the most recent adversities the Asian community is collectively facing, it is also crucial to remember that the xenophobia and racism against both Chinese and other Asian Americans has been documented throughout history. So here's a general overview of what this webinar will be covering today. We will be defining mental health. We will take a closer look at the Asian identity and what it means to be Asian. We will also cover important barriers or issues to Asian mental well-being, including stigma and intergenerational trauma. Finally, we will take a look at the ways to break these barriers and pave new pathways for Asian mental well-being. I would like to start by giving this definition of mental health. As per mentalhealth.gov, mental health can be understood as our emotional, psychological, and social well being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. In addition, it helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence through adulthood. I would like to note here that you are welcome to add, alter, or disagree with this provided definition. It is not exhaustive. Now let's take a look at what it means to identify as Asian. Considering the strong interconnectedness of Asian identities, I will be reviewing 4 definitions to explore these diverse identities. The term Asian refers to individuals who are citizens of countries in East and Southeast Asia or in the Indian subcontinent. Asian also describes people of Asian descent. Asian Americans trace their origins to the regions previously listed. Pacific Islander refers to individuals from Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Guamaninian, Fijian, and other peoples of Pacific Island nations. The term Desi refers to individuals whose culture and ethnic identity are related to the Indian subcontinent and diaspora. This includes individuals from Bangladesh, Himalaya, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Individuals from Nepal may also identify as Desi. It is important to note, however, other individuals surrounding South Asia may also consider themselves as Desi, depending upon their cultural and ethnic practices and identities. An additional component to take into account when understanding Asian identities is considering intersectionality amongst our Asian identity and other aspects of our identity. Viewing identities from an intersectional approach allows us to understand the individual beyond their identity and holistically focus on their uniqueness as a diverse individual. We can begin by understanding these intersectionalities through the lens of heterogeneity. So, cultural heterogeneity can be understood as differences in cultural identities, in essence, class, ethnicity, language, traditions, religion, and even a person's sense of belonging in a place all fall under this definition. These differences can make it more or less difficult for people to navigate their way through mental health. Social heterogeneity can be understood as differences in our other identities, including age, sex, gender identity, race, ethnicity, etc. Religion can also be understood as a part of intersectionality. Your unique Asian identity combined with your religion, if you follow one, can intersect with your other religious identities, allowing you to experience individualized challenges. When thinking of the LGBTQIA plus community and intersectionality, we may understand this acronym as an umbrella term that houses diverse gender and sexual identities. It's important to remember that when combined with an individual's other identities, members of this community have vastly different experiences of both privilege and oppression. For example, one may identify as a gay Asian male living in the United States. Here, their identity as a male provides them with certain gender privileges, but their racial identity as an Asian minority in the US, coupled with their sexual orientation, places them at a unique intersection amongst these identities. In addition, the LGBTQ plus identifying individuals may be discriminated against within the Asian community, and Asian LGBTQ plus individuals may be discriminated against in the LGBTQ plus spaces. It is important to note that the intersection amongst these identities can result in both experiences of privilege and oppression. As mentioned earlier, an intersectional lens allows us to identify and address discrimination and oppression in its complex forms. Now that we have addressed the diversity of different Asian identities, we will be transitioning into several topics concerning barriers to mental health well-being. In the continent of Asia, problems arising from mental illnesses are the second largest contributor to years lost to a disability and illness. Stigma is one of the foundations for these barriers to Asian mental well-being. The American Psychological Association defines stigma as a negative social attitude attached to a characteristic of an individual that may be regarded as a mental, physical, or social deficiency. In addition, stigma implies social disapproval and can lead to unfair discrimination against and exclusion of an individual. When thinking of stigma in the context of Asian mental health, stigma includes negative beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors towards individuals with a mental illness. This negative attitude persists in many parts of the world and is highly prevalent in Asian countries. So, what can stigmatization of mental health look like? Stigmatization of mental health can manifest itself as neglecting to holistically care and attend to needs of an individual with a mental illness. In addition, someone who holds a stigma against mental health may believe that individuals with a mental illness are weak, dangerous, contagious, and/or morally deficient. As a result, these individuals with mental illnesses may be excluded from social, romantic, and financial opportunities. Unfortunately, individuals who hold a stigma mentality fail to address and support their loved ones with a mental illness. They may even invalidate and fail to accept their own state of mental well being. So, how far have Asian countries come from the stigmatization of mental health? On one end, developed countries like Australia and New Zealand have allocated financial and medical resources to build their healthcare system to be inclusive of mental health care at the communal level. Although significant problems remain, middle income countries such as China and Thailand have also made progress in combating lack of mental health care. This includes anti-stigmatization intervention programs. On the other end, lower income countries such as India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Philippines, and Vietnam are facing challenges to invest towards mental health care. The considerable amount of work that must be done is a reflection of the historically documented stigma and neglect surrounding mental health disorders. As a result, these Asian countries are facing a persistent stigmatization, a lack of funding, and a deficit of mental health care professionals such as therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists. As one can imagine, the continued stigmatization rooted in these countries is passed through generations of conditioned mindsets. A second major barrier to Asian mental well-being is the issue of intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma refers to the ways in which chronic stress and/or trauma experienced in one generation affects the health and well-being of future generations. It also describes trauma that a community sharing social identities may collectively experience and transmit to their descendants. The transmission of trauma is correlated with stress-related health issues and can persist for multiple future generations. The Asian community experiences a unique set of challenges from intergenerational trauma. These challenges can include, but are not limited to, the ones that are listed on this slide. Asians may experience caste-based oppression. The effects of caste-based oppression and trauma has not been the focus of academic literature. However, there have been documented experiences and autobiographical narratives which reveal prominent symptoms of intergenerational trauma, such as anxiety, guilt, shame, anger, fatigue, despair, grief, and loss of trust. Unfortunately, oppression and atrocities perpetuated by higher castes have rarely met with resistance or intolerance as lower castes have internalized inferiority. Lower castes were conditioned throughout history to believe in hegemony of upper caste as deeply rooted in a sacred ideology. Another experience that initiates and perpetuates intergenerational trauma is the adversity faced during and after the immigration process or when seeking asylum in another country. Hence, it is critical to consider the potentially stressful and traumatic experiences that catalyze immigration. Building off of this, it has been documented that pre-immigration trauma is associated with high levels of psychological stress. Following the immigration process, acculturation gaps between parents and children may form. Acculturation can be described as a process of cultural adaptation. This adaptation may be characterized by changes in different psychosocial dimensions such as overall health, specifically mental health of family members and communities. The process of acculturation is triggered by the intersection of cultures, which produces changes in identities, behaviors, attitudes, norms, and knowledge. As children acculturate to a foreign country much faster than their parents, the acculturative gaps produces conflict between the children and parents. These conflicts have been positively correlated with depressive symptoms in East and Southeast Asian adolescents. Additional experiences that contribute to intergenerational trauma in the Asian community include experiencing and surviving through difficult generations of racism, racial harassment, discrimination, hate crimes, and xenophobia, stress and trauma from the historical and ongoing atrocities committed against these Asian communities, and post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression resulting from these experiences, which are later transmitted through generations. So how is this intergenerational trauma carried over? This transmission of trauma is genetic, psychological, and social as it stems from inherited genetic expression patterns. These patterns include the transmission of hormones, gene expression, abnormally high cortisol, which is stress levels. These abnormal cortisol levels can be transmitted onto the offspring as early as fetal development. As a result, communities impacted by intergenerational trauma are increasingly vulnerable to developing mental health disorders such as anxiety and or depression. This form of trauma is directly linked to higher risks for psychological and physiological health concerns in future generations as well. It also stems from observed, learned, and internalized behavior patterns from parents that children have been exposed to trauma indirectly. These children may experience vicarious traumatization, where trauma survivors' children sense and internalize their parents' trauma response behaviors and defense mechanisms. This intergenerational pattern is observed and documented in Southern and Southeastern Asian American co- communities given experiences and adversities unique to their community. So, how can intergenerational trauma manifest itself for Asian Americans? In refugee and immigrant Asian families, children may grow up to realize the immense sacrifices their parents had made in hopes of building a brighter future for them. These children also see their parents face challenges of being in a foreign country where they may feel a struggle to feel welcome. Hearing and seeing this happen, Asian children may take it upon themselves to fulfill the dreams and wishes that their parents were never able to. In the process of fulfilling these goals, children may feel apparent or self-induced pressure to live up to high expectations. While doing this, when feelings of anxiety or stress arise, Asian children view their unpleasant emotions and experiences, such as anxiety, as trivial compared to the tribulations their parents and grandparents have survived through. This self-invalidation, pressure, and guilt may manifest as mental health disorders that Asians refuse to address and don't seek mental support for. Accompanying this harmful cycle, the model minority stereotype further perpetuates familial, cultural, and societal expectations placed on Asian Americans. The model minority stereotype is the expectation on Asian Americans to be living the American dream, to be high achievers, and be inherently skilled at mathematics, sciences, and technology, be obedient, submissive, self-reliant, and never in need of assistance. Given these harmful expectations, individuals who identify as Asian American may feel heightened pressure to model the stereotypes set for them. Because of this imposed pressure, Asian Americans may feel a need to live up to the model minority stereotype in order to compensate for their parents' losses and sacrifices. Asian Americans may then push through their challenges to meet such expectations regardless of the psychological stress it places them under. This then hinders their ability to address, identify, and seek support for potential mental health concerns. It is also to note that the model minority stereotype silences experiences of racism and discrimination against Asian Americans. By viewing Asian Americans as beneficiaries of the American dream, the model minority stereotype erases atrocities committed against Asians throughout America's history. Despite the ongoing injustices, this myth creates a misconception that Asian Americans are no longer experiencing oppression. As one can imagine, this undermines the challenges and struggles Asian Americans experience, which can then make it much more challenging to seek psychological support. Now that we have established a few out of the many barriers to Asian mental well being, we will be transitioning into paving pathways for mental well being in this community. As we pave pathways to combat these challenges unique to Asians and Asian Americans, we must look at the Asian mental health being through an intersectional lens while remaining sensitive to racial and ethnic differences and experiences specific to this community. To actively challenge the stigma surrounding mental health in the Asian community, initiatives focused on education, empowerment, and advocacy must be implemented. For example, academic and mental institutions may establish courses that explore diverse identities that allow for discussions on mental health and guide minorities on how to advocate for oneself and their community. Such programs may spread awareness, thereby advocating for the need of further investment in global mental health well being. Alongside this, it is also essential we account for biological, psychological, and social factors that transmit intergenerational trauma. Oftentimes, psychological services fail to regard such inherited causal factors that directly link to the development of mental health disorders. This is especially prevalent when diagnosing mental health disorders in the Asian community, as a Western perspective biases the diagnostic process. For example, the Western perspective of psychology overlooks and excludes racially and culturally specific manifestations of mental health disorder symptoms for the Asian community. To achieve this, resources, strategies, and equitable mental health care must be readily accessible to all identities. While doing this, it is equally important to value the preferences and resources and services Asian identities may feel connected to, such as faith-based healing and mindfulness-based therapy. Thus, accounting for the multidimensional identity and experiences is essential to providing holistic care in and outside of the field of psychology. Here are a list of resources and organizations that are inclusive of experiences unique to the Asian community. I would like to add that all these resources are hyperlinked. This means we will be able to directly access the websites by clicking the name of the resource. These slides will be shared with you at the end of this webinar. The one resource is the Asian Mental Health Collective. The Asian Mental Health Collective aspires to normalize and destigmatize mental health within the Asian community, as well as make mental health easily available, approachable, and accessible to Asian communities worldwide. The Asian Mental Health Collective provides access to a variety of resources, including the following. The Therapist Director helps you locate an Asian, Pacific Islander, and South Asian American therapist by your state. The mental health FAQ feature is created to help you yourself or your loved ones who may be battling a mental illness to seek clarity surrounding mental health. Advancing Asian Mental Health is an interview series featuring individuals and organizations striving to pave the way for awareness, acceptance, and normalization of Asian mental health issues amongst the Asian communities around the world. My Asian Mental Health is a community project aimed to sharing journeys and experiences of members of the Asian diaspora while empowering you to share your own story. Lastly, the Asian Mental Health Collective provides a list of international resources and crisis hotlines. To further dive deeper into the resources that are available, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI website, strives to educate, advocate, listen, and to lead to help improve the lives of individuals with mental illnesses. This website also provides you an understanding on how our culture and identity impact mental health for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. The NAMI blog features the latest research, stories of recovery, and strategies for both ending stigma and leading healthy lives from the perspective of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Another resource is the Anxiety and Depression Association for America. It aims to prevent treat and cure anxiety disorders and depression while striving to promote the implementation of evidence-based treatments. In addition, it provides guidance on choosing a mental health provider. The Asian American Psychological Association also aims to advancing mental health and well-being of Asian American communities through research, professional practice, and education and policy. The Asian American Psychological Association also provides access to a variety of resources, including COVID resources. So the COVID-19 resources on mental health and self-care are aimed to respond to racism, xenophobia, parenting and caregiving, engaging with faith and spirit, and anti-stigma statements. The Asian American Psychological Association also provides guidelines on bullying and victimization for Asian American and Pacific Islander students in the following languages: English, Korean, Simplified Chinese, Traditional Chinese, and Vietnamese. The Asian American Psychological Association also provides information on university courses, research and volunteer opportunities for undergraduate students interested in studying topics on Asian Americans and psychology. Lastly, the author Isra Nasir, a South Asian Pakistani psychotherapist and mental health educator, provides 8 detailed self-help strategies when speaking about your mental health with your Asian family and or loved ones. And I have provided a list of references. You are more than welcome to check out these articles and websites that have greatly contributed to our webinar today. These are also additional references. Lastly, as this event is presented by Step Up for Mental Health, these are support services Step Up for Mental Health offers. We have 4 branches that collectively work towards our mission statement. These branches include Step Up for Assistance, where we have helpline peer support, one-on-one peer chat support, and a guide to finding resources specific to your needs. We also have Step Up Small Grants, which provide small grants, medication, emergency food, and 1 to 3 months of mental therapy costs living in poverty. We also have Step Up for Kids, where we have educational outreach, mindfulness, art tech workshops, peer groups, and career events. Lastly, we have the Buy Plus Project, where we provide mental health wellness events, educational outreach, and peer support and resources. We are also welcoming new volunteers and donations that will help us do more and fulfill our mission. If you are interested, I have provided the links on this slide for you to access. To reiterate, we wish to educate, fight causes, and change minds about mental health and its impact on families. To learn more, visit stepupformentalhealth.org. I would also like to end by saying thank you for your attendance today. This webinar would not have been possible without your support and compassion towards mental well-being. Because of this, we are collectively one step closer to being stronger advocates of self-help and mental health well-being. You are absolutely welcome to ask questions through the Q&A feature at this time. So one of the questions that were asked through the Q&A feature was, do you have any resources or suggestions for individuals who would like to be better allies to the Asian community? This is a very great question. I highly recommend checking out it was one of the first resources that were listed. It's I believe it's called the Asian Mental Health Collective. It does a great job of breaking down what mental health can look like in the Asian community. And I strongly believe that as we educate ourselves on what mental health can look like to this community, as we have addressed through our presentation, we become better allies. Another way I would answer this question is by communicating with your Asian peers and asking what they would appreciate when you are seeking to support them and what type of support they are seeking in that moment. In addition, I would also say all the resources that are provided do a wonderful job of giving an overview of how to achieve your goal of being a better ally. Another question that was asked is there a stigma with Asian families with it or with it comes to mental health support? I would, from my personal experience and the research I have done, not well, personal experience vicariously through my peers as well, I would definitely say there is stigma that comes with mental health support. As addressed in the PowerPoint, uh, stigmatization can look like viewing individuals with mental illnesses to be weak and dangerous and incapable. So that stigma makes it much harder for families to be supportive as there's a negative attitude surrounding mental health. But I would like to add that this is not the case for all Asian families and Asian communities. It does depend on the, the conditioned mindsets and mentalities that these families grew up grew up with. I highly appreciate all the wonderful comments you all are leaving in the chat feature. And I'm glad that you were all able to take away from today's presentation. You will all be receiving a recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation in a PDF form. It will be sent to your the provided emails you all registered with.